This is the Gods to Ghosts Volleyball podcast, and I'm your host, Scott Bemke. Our interview today features Los Angeles' own Art Alper. Art grew up in the Los Angeles area and attended Los Angeles High School, where he was a basketball player and was All-City first team in 1946. He then went on to compete collegiately at UCLA for the Bruins and legendary coach John Wooden from 1948 through 1951, where he was a starting guard on their 1951 conference championship team. Once his basketball playing career concluded, Art found another sport that he loved and reveled in, which was the sport of volleyball. Art competed at the highest level indoors for the prestigious Hollywood YMCA Stars team as a starting outside hitter from 1956 through 1959, where the team won 4 Open championships, and he also was named a 3-time All-American. During that same time period, he also competed for the USA men's indoor national team, with the highlight being a 4th-place finish at the World Championships in Paris, France in 1956. In 2009, Art was awarded the United States Volleyball Association All-Time Great Award. And perhaps his greatest accomplishment, and sired 3 amazing sons, of which one is his favorite. It just depends on who's sitting closest to him at the time. Let's get started with Art Alper. He's 93, it's still going strong, and was a fun, pleasure, and enjoyable guy to interview. I had a great time speaking with him, and he's got some great perspective on some players in a time period that not many people are around to share with us anymore. Let's roll. Hey, Art. Scott Bemke, great to meet you.
Same here.
And I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today here. I'm well versed on your name. I've heard it from the one and only fellow lefty, otherwise known as the greatest volleyball coach to walk the earth, Al Skates.
Oh, yeah. Al is left-handed, if I recall.
Yeah, he said I think he believed he patterned his game a bit after you coming behind you, because you were a talented athlete, lefty, and so he watched you a lot. Whether I'm not sure you were aware of that or not, but now you know.
No, I remember a little story that when he was hitting it, particularly when everybody warms up, everybody's All-American warm up, they pound the ball. I said, there's a block up there, and all you have to do is hit it off, and it goes out of bounds, and it's still a point.
Yeah. That's interesting. Before we did this interview, I reached out to him and asked him about that. I can't believe I get to text message Al Skates, who I always dreamed of playing for in high school, but I was nowhere nearly good enough. But and I asked him, and he always gets back to me, and I asked him, do you have some good questions for me to ask about Art, to Art? And he mentioned that very same story to me, and he said that always resonated with him. So you had an impression on him, and look what he's done. 19 NCAA titles, a handful of USVBA ones before it became an NCAA sport in 1970. Yeah, he's, there'll never be another like him.
No, he's great.
Let's rewind to the very beginning, Art, about where you grew up, what life was like in that golden era of time period, what kind of things you remember doing as a kid, and then we'll get into your athletic career as a Bruin for Coach Wooden, and then the volleyball stuff as well.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a mid-Wilshire area, which is just west of La Brea, and went to the local high schools, Los Angeles High, which was the biggest school and the oldest, certainly, in Los Angeles at that time, and we were one of the few that even had a swimming pool, which it was kind of unusual in those days, but it was a very competitive school. The football team in particular they didn't have districts so much, and kids could go wherever they wanted to. So LA High was really a boon for athletics, and as a matter of fact, the football coach there went from high school to coach UCLA, a guy named Bert LaBoucherie.
Okay, and I'm guessing he must have been Right before Red Sanders then, or right in that ballpark,
right.
huh?
Before him, yeah.
And so what year did you graduate, or were you attending high school then, Art?
I was 43 to 46.
Okay, nice.
So many of the kids went on, particularly the football players, went on to play at SC or UCLA, even Alabama, as a matter of fact.
Oh, wow. Do you recall any of those names of some of the more talented ones that went on to SC or UCLA offhand?
Yeah, there was a quarterback called Ray Nagel, and then there was, a guy named Scotty Fick who played at SC, and, it was all pretty much local. Another guy named Boots Herb was a quarterback. I think he played at Cal.
Okay.
And, they're just, football was, they didn't have the districts where you had to stay in your district to play. So kids would come from the valley even to play football for this guy. And then he went on to UCLA and had a mediocre career and ended up at Caltech.
There you go. Yeah, it's from the penthouse to the outhouse, as you Bruins like to say. Oh, so what you're telling me is in high school, that LA high school was pretty stacked.
Yeah, it was really powerful.
Right.
Basketball was, the gyms were not that big. They had to put a pad on the wall so nobody got killed. And drive them in.
Oh my goodness! So from the high school basketball days, then I believe, does the name Lonnie Lee, who coached at Reseda for the Regents, ring a bell at all with you at all?
Lonnie very well. Yeah.
Yeah. What can you tell me about him other than he had 3 amazing sons, not just as athletes but people?
Yeah, he was a pretty good player himself at UCLA, and. Most of those guys got married. They came back from the service. I was, like 18, and they're all 21, and guys are smoking in the locker room. I can remember one guy, they're saying, "Yeah, I killed that gook." I'm 18 years old, and they're smoking in the locker room.
Right, it was a different world for those guys that came back for the war compared to yours, I guess, huh?
Yeah, you bet.
So, yeah, I know Lonnie had a lot of coaching success with the Reseda Regents. So, Art, how did it come about that you ended up attending UCLA, and tell us about your time as a Bruin there?
Well, my mother and both her sisters were school teachers, and they wanted me to go to Harvard because my folks originally came from Boston. Mm-hmm. I was not going to have any of that. But going to the beach and
right.
all the other good things that were out here. So anyhow, we had a good coach at LA High, and we won the league, I think. And
you were player of the year.
Yeah, I was player of the year in the Western League and all first string All City. And then I went to UCLA, and all these guys could come back from the service. I was one of only 2 guys on the freshman team that hadn't been in the service. And I didn't play much, and then Wooden hadn't showed up, and then he came to UCLA, and I had my locker with the varsity players, but he put an ad in the paper inviting anybody to come out for the sport. And
that made you feel real secure, huh, Art?
Yeah, I mean, they had 3 courts running, and he kept one assistant from the previous guy was really an assistant who picked up the balls and got them to the players primarily. But anyhow, I was in the locker room there, and I was playing. As I said, he put an ad in the paper, and they had all these 3 courts going, and I got stuck on the last court, but I had my locker down with the other players, and I'm banging around after the practice was over and yelling, this is ridiculous. Meanwhile, I had been playing AAU ball for the coach at Loyola, And he said, if you're ever unhappy, you got a full ride.
To go to
a guy named Scotty McDonald. And Scotty and Wooden didn't get along very well because Scotty drank.
Okay.
And Wooden was a teetotaler. So anyhow, I'm banging away, and then the coach came by, and I understand you got a problem. I said, yeah, coach. You've got me down with a bunch of rum-dums. Put me with the other guys, and I'll show you what I can do. So that's what happened. And I made so
you coach Coach Wooden on how to coach you is what you're telling me.
Well, what they did is they had it's the only time it ever happened, but they posted who made the team. I mean, because he had so many guys out. It was a riot. Fortunately, I made the cut.
Yeah, I bet it was like a line to Disney to get it in to see that thing, huh? It was probably posted like on a wall with some masking tape.
Yeah.
So that must have been pretty interesting. So that was what, 1948 to 51 in that frame for you there with the Bruins? Okay.
Correct.
And so who else made that list? I'm sure it's probably imprinted in your mind. You got a photographic memory on that, Art?
After the first year, I don't remember many other guys making it from that team. Meaning from the freshman team. Mm-hmm. Wooden came and he started running, and these guys, they were so used to the slow break. He cut a lot of guys out, so that was the way it went.
Right.
You want to know who I played with?
Yeah.
Eddie Sheldrake and Jerry Norman, who later became, an assistant for Wooden, and a guy named Grover Luxinger, Dick Ridgway. My son knows more about it than I remember.
Yeah, you taught those boys well. Then with the Wooden Pyramid of Success, nonetheless.
Right. Well, that was a great little deal with those summer leagues. And then he was very nice to, I guess, my boys, because he knew the last name. So.
You never forgot the Alper. Now, does the name Chuck Zaluska ring a bell with you at all, Art?
Oh yeah, Charlie and I played together.
Okay.
One year. Yeah, he was a banger. Really put his shoulder down and drove with the ball.
The reason I ask you is, does the name Ron Von Hagen ring a bell with you at all?
Yeah, that's a volleyball player.
Yeah, and his father, Richard, actually played basketball in the 30s.
Oh, really?
For Wilbur Johns at UCLA. But the reason that I ask you about Zaluska, and also Don Bragg might have been another name that was right in that ballpark.
Don came in after mid-semester.
Okay.
When I was a senior. And he was scrimmaging with us, and I said, oh, my goodness, this guy's going to be great. And he's a very, very bright guy, too. I understood he did, academically, I don't know, honors or what, but it was a tragedy he died so young.
Right.
There were good times, I got to tell you. I was living in Malibu. I was the only guy with a tan because I lived with we had about 4 or 5 groups of guys, football and basketball players that lived down there. And at that time, it was like a 10, 15-minute drive to UCLA with no traffic. But today, you couldn't make it in an hour.
Yeah. What are some of the highlights in terms of playing for Coach Wooden? When you had him as a coach, was it apparent early on that this guy is something special, or did it not dawn on you until after you played for him? I'm always kind of curious about how he had so much success and what were some of the things that he did as a coach that made those teams just, ultimately became one of the greatest coaches in any sport ever.
No, our practices were really pretty brutal. I mean, we never sat down. If you weren't scrimmaging, you were shooting. While somebody was scrimmaging, you were shooting free throws. You never sat down. And you couldn't drink water for some reason. We would get a towel and wet it and then suck on the towel.
Like John Thompson at Georgetown later on. Oh, wow. Yeah, things have changed now with that. We now know water is good.
Yeah.
He kept you busy and made efficient use of your practice time.
Oh yeah, you never sat down if you weren't in a scrimmage or whatever. You were shooting free throws. We had about 6 or 8 baskets around the court at that time. I never played in Poly. I was only in. They call it the sweat box or the BO barn.
That was where you guys played at that time?
Yeah. The gym is still there. If you went up there, you wouldn't believe it. They took down the bleachers. They put them up for the game.
I was just trying to remind Art that Coach Wooden was really successful with these guys right from the beginning, and they won 20-some games for a couple of years there. Art continued to get more minutes and was a starter as a senior, but they got to the NCAAs, and a couple of them got the flu. I think they were playing Washington or something like that, and they couldn't play, and so they got bounced, unfortunately, early because the illness struck them down. It was a lot milder than COVID, but it got them. Here's Art.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you always remember, like in football, a guy intercepts the ball and he's ready to run for a touchdown. Mm-hmm. There was a pass between 2 guys I cut through before, and we had dinner the night before. We took a bus from Chicago to Wisconsin to play up there, and a lot of guys got the, whatever you call it, the
stomach flu?
Yeah. Anyhow, I always remember they were passing to the other team, and I cut through and got the ball and was going down. I got to the free throw line, and I thought, if I take one more step, I'm going to drop everything on the floor. I was everybody. The only reason I was playing or starting was because of the flu. Bad food that we got. And so I turned around and handed the ball off and squeezed it together and got off the floor and ran to the locker room.
Yeah, that's never any fun. I'm guessing maybe you guys were either in Milwaukee or maybe Madison for that game.
Madison.
How neat.
Well, we took a bus from Chicago. It took us forever. The way they did things in those days were really pathetic. As far as when you played in the Garden, we were in some flea bag hotel, and dogs were running up and down the hallways. It was wild.
An adventure, to put it mildly. A lot different than they have it these days, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Back in the day, there was a lot of those athletes on the athletic teams used to pledge for Bill Rika and Von Hagen were both in Beta Theta Pi at UCLA, and a lot of the basketball players, football players, and athletes would be in those fraternities. By chance, did you join one or no?
Yeah, well, what happened was I was there right after the war, and I started in 46, and I didn't want to go into a fraternity because I didn't want to go through all the pledging and the bullshit you had to do. They'd leave guys out in the middle of nowhere and, ask them to get home.
Right.
There were all the crazy stuff that they did.
Any other highlights from your time playing for Coach Wooden? Were there, some things in terms of games, life lessons that you picked up from him that resonate with you still to this day or helped you with your sons?
I think we were pretty regimented, and you were organized. What I really learned that, you were organized, that's for sure.
There you go. Now, I'm going to bring up a name to you that Von Hagen mentioned to me, and so did Coach Skates. And I know he was a volleyball name, but Von Hagen later in life would meet up with Coach Wooden quite often, and he told him that Ralph Ingen was the heck of a basketball player and one of a supremely talented athlete. And I'm just curious, was Engen at UCLA when you were there? And then what was his story? Because I've heard nothing but amazing things about this shorter guy that was just a stud athlete, a great setter. And when we get to the volleyball stuff, I know that chump Harry Wilson used to always rely on Engen to line everybody up out there. An on-court general, if you will. Coach Wooden,
he went out for the basketball team, but he really didn't make it.
Okay.
He was very good, and I think he went from Santa Ana or out there, and He was just too short and just couldn't cut it. That's basically it.
But if he had been how tall was he approximately?
Well, I don't know.
You had to guess.
5'8", maybe.
Okay, so if he had been what were you, Art? 6 what?
I was almost 6'4".
Okay, so had Rolf been 6'2", 6'3" in that ballpark, he would have been in the mix.
Right. Now, I always remember that some guy was out and I'm banging on him, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "You're trying to take my job."
Yeah, dog eat dog out there. So Rolf did attend UCLA. He tried out for the UCLA men's basketball program, just wasn't tall enough to cut it.
He was very good, and he came from Santa Ana Junior College, I believe.
Okay.
Very nice guy.
Right. And you ultimately then, how did the transition from basketball to volleyball come into play? Where did you learn how to play and get to the level where you ultimately got to compete in the World Championships and for the Hollywood Y and for the U.S. team?
Well, I started down at the beach down in Santa Monica. We would take a streetcar down and take a ride down to the coast and get on the beach, and started playing volleyball down there. They played 6-man, and then primarily it was 2-man. But they were mostly older guys when I first started.
So are you talking that Muscle Beach near the pier there?
No, this
Sereno?
This was west of that. It was just south of, the incline. You go drive down to the, from Wilshire Boulevard. Down you made a left turn and played down there until you were good enough to move up to, it was Sereno Beach, was where all the college kids met from the local, Stanford, UCLA, SC, and Cal. All in the summertime, we all met down there, and they had volleyball courts there. And then you worked your way out to the first court, and that was the big deal to show off with the ladies. They had a nice little beer park, Nini's it was called, and then it was called the Sereno Grill.
But it was called Nini's before it became the Sereno Grill, huh?
Yeah, he owned it, the guy, but I don't. Then they had a little back area after everybody was leaving. We'd drink beer back there on occasion.
Unbeknownst to Coach Wooden, the teetotaler.
Well, that was,
I always heard that was just a really neat area down there with all the co-eds there. It was just the scene. It was the best place to be, and a lot of people talk about that, especially that was after the war like that in World War II, I believe it was, that was just a beautiful place that just continued to blossom over the years. So
that's correct.
You got to experience in all of its glory is what it sounds like.
Oh, yeah, it was great. I mean, we lived in Malibu my last 2 years, and the house is still there. It was right, I remember the address even, 20,000 Pacific Coast Highway. I drive by that thing, and there were about 4 or 5 groups of guys that rented houses down there, and it was party central on weekends. You were a long way away from the coach because he wasn't into drinking or anything, but I persevered, and so that's what.
It worked out pretty good for you, where you got to get some quality starting time as a senior. So,
right.
Now, if I bring up a couple of names from that state, Sereno, Santa Monica area. Now, there was the Shargo brothers, Sam and Nate Shargo, and then there was Manny Sines, and then there was also Bernie Holtzman before we get to the king of the beach, Gene Selznick.
Well, these guys all played at State Beach, and they didn't play so much. There was a higher quality volleyball. Gene played down there. He and this Bernie Holtzman were, kind of the kings of the beach.
Right. So that you basically didn't have any specific training. It was just going to the beach and playing and just being the athlete that you were. You picked the skills up right then and there.
Correct.
Must be rough. Damn it, Art. You're that athlete that we all just shake our head at. Like, geez, I've been doing this since I'm 6. This guy comes out there for a summer, and he's better than all of us. That's when we take up underwater basket weaving, Art. Thanks a lot. So, and was it like, Von Hagen told me Bill Lika brought him to Sorrento, late in their college career, and he said he knew right away after the first day there that that's what he wanted to do and be a part of, and he couldn't get good enough fast enough. Did you take to volleyball that way when you were down there, where you knew that you really loved it and it was something that you wanted to pursue then?
Not really. I enjoyed the game, and the Hollywood Y, I don't know how I got up there originally, but that's where it all happened. And
so how did the whole Hollywood Y thing come about? You're 20, you're like in college, you're 21, 22, or done with college. You've been playing at the beach there at the bottom of the incline in Santa Monica. Did you get invited to the Hollywood Y? Did somebody invite you to come play up there? And then how did things progress from there? Were you actually, they had the Comets, and then they had the Stars, the A team and the B team. So let's hear a bit about that and who was on it that you got to play with and who was coaching.
Well, there was Mike O'Hara.
Okay.
Myself and a guy named Bill Olson, who dynamite indoors. He never played outdoors. He's about 6'5" and could really pound the ball. And we had Engen and a guy named Walt Schiller were the two setters. Selznick played 1 year, and then he was unhappy. I made All-American and he didn't, or something. He got all upset and started his own team at the West Side Jewish Center.
Yeah, I heard about how that worked out, and this was in probably the early 50s, mid 50s, then somewhere between 52 and 56 in that ballpark.
Yeah, right, correct.
Okay, you mentioned the name Bill Olson, and when I had the pleasure of interviewing Al Skates about who some of the most impressive hitters have been that he's seen over his lifetime, the name Bill Olson was one of the earlier ones for him. And I believe from what Coach Skates mentioned to me, Bill was a heck of a baseball pitcher, literally could have pitched at the major league level. And then he just had one of those arms that went on forever, and he could really lay the wood to it, or as Dave Bordwell says, deliver some leather sandwiches right down the line into somebody's mouth. So let's hear about Olson, because I've Dave Bordwell also told me he was a sight to behold.
Yeah, he was, but he was a psycho. Not really, but he had mental problems. I had to be calm him down half the time.
You played psychologist with him, or?
Yeah, exactly.
So Olson but do you recall any specific big time hits that he had where you just went, damn, that was pretty impressive?
Yeah, no, he was just he had a great leap and he could pound the ball. I never really thought about it in those terms of, being particularly impressed with any players. They were all good, so.
Right. And you said he was a bit of a head case?
Yeah.
Just he would get angry, frustrated easily?
If somebody blocked him, he'd get all upset, and you have to calm him down.
Right. Ron Lang, I had mentioned the name Bill Olson too, and Lang's not one to throw compliments around very freely. So he said he'd seen times when Olson would hit a ball. Lang was digging on the other side of the court, and Olson hit a ball over the block, over Lang's head that hit the ground behind Lang's head. He couldn't even get his hands on it, and it still bounced into the ceiling that way, like Jack kind of a trajectory and velocity to go over the block, over Lang's head, digging a couple 10 feet behind the block, and the ball still hitting the ground like he's bouncy house. So that guy's the real deal then, from what I understand. I got a really neat photo of him. So I've heard Schiller was a pretty talented player as well, and then Engen. Any neat, fun stories you want to share with us about some of those old school guys from the Y?
There were a few of us that liked to, we're all married and stuff, a lot of us anyhow. We'd go out afterwards and have a few drinks, which was always fun with the guys.
Yeah.
And, all in all, I didn't socialize too much with them. I'm married, and I must have had a son by that time.
Yeah.
My favorite son who's sitting here.
Yeah, well, that's what you said the other day when we were talking with Neil. I was doing fine up until now. Now I blew it right before Christmas, too. Your stocking's going to have a lot of coal in it.
Oh, that's a laughing deal that we do all the time, right?
Yeah.
When you got a few kids. But the AAU was the way that you became a member of the U.S. team, right? And so these teams were trying to collect the best players they could, and the Hollywood Y was the successful team for that whole mid to late 50s era. So they went to Europe and they played in the World Championships. They went to the Pan American Games and won that. And Art was on a number of those teams, and that's when he garnered those All-American accolades for 3 years. There was that travel, but there was the challenge of having to deal with kids back home and a wife back home, and going to a long trip in the European Championships and so forth. I think he'll tell you was not something that his wife was necessarily all that happy about.
Oh, yeah, he was buying plenty of flowers and making sure the dishes were fixed, and the grass was cut when he got home. Lots of box of chocolates, right, Art?
No, my thing about the house was as soon as I could make enough money, I said, I got to make more money because I don't want to mow the lawn.
I can relate.
I didn't want to do the gardening.
I hear ya.
You live at the beach. I didn't want to spend my weekends gardening.
There you go. Now with the, I've always heard, were you overseas in Paris for the 56 World Championships?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you recall who traveled over there? Was Selznick on the team with you guys at that time? I'm believing he was, and he made all world. So if you can remember anything about what made him a super talented player, and if there was any other players over there from any of the other countries that still resonate with you, that you go, wow, these guys are pretty good.
Yeah. I saw one guy from Romania could hit with either hand. I'd never seen that in my life. And I went up to the guy after the match, and I think they won it. I don't recall. But I'm talking to the guy. He didn't understand a word I said. I said, you're the greatest hitter I've ever seen. Yeah. I've never seen a guy that could hit with either hand very productively.
Yeah, that's impressive. And then what about Gene? What made him special and make its way to the all-world team in '56?
Well, he was very gregarious, and he would go out and play just with all the other European players, just screwing around, and so he got to be very popular, and he certainly was a great player.
All right. Now, I've heard the stories about Harry Wilson as a coach. If you recall, in '64, the Olympics didn't go the way they had hoped. Basically, it was a train wreck, to put it mildly, over there in Tokyo. So, and I know that there was a lot of issues with Gene and Lang and other people just not feeling that Harry picked the best team to go over there. What do you remember about Harry as a coach? Good, both the good and the bad, just the way you want to tell it here.
Well, he knew the game, but he wasn't a great coach. He had another assistant, a guy named Doc Burrows.
Sure.
And you know that name?
I do. Yeah, I've heard the name quite a bit from Coach Skates.
He helped a lot. He was more aware of what was really going on. Harry wasn't that great a coach. I probably shouldn't say that, but he had the players. That's what made the team.
Right. But Burroughs was more of the guy that you could look to that knew what he was doing out there.
Yeah, a little more so. He settled things down,
Nice. Any other fond memories about your time playing indoors, USVBA, with any of those players? What about O'Hara? I got to ask about O'Hara. He's one of the all-time legends on both the beach and indoors, and then was quite the businessman, but maybe had some controversial things here and there. But what do you remember about him as an athlete and a person?
Well, Mike didn't grow until he got out of high school. His brother, he had an older brother named Jim, who played at Santa Barbara, basketball that is. And Mike didn't grow until he got into college. He belonged to a fraternity called Delta Tau Delta, or the Delts as they call them. And they had a volleyball court in the backyard in the fraternity house, and he spent a lot of time playing there and improved his game. But his real forte was outdoors. Mike seemed to float over the stands. That's all I can say. I mean, he was moved so gracefully.
I've heard as much. I think they called him the jumping jack, and he could really had a lot of strong skill set, and also that kind of mental fortitude where you'd have to kill him before he would accept a loss.
Yeah, so I think he went out for basketball in Samo High or someplace like that.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a good guy. Mike was very nice guy.
Excellent. Now, in terms of playing out on the beach, Art, did you ever compete in any tournaments on the beach, or was it more just for fun? And did you ever make your way up to state to compete against, Bernie or Gene or any of those top level players that were playing up there once your game got good?
We went up one year and played pretty well. I don't remember exactly, but I do know we beat Manny Sainz and Gene. That one year, it was quite an upset.
Was it were you called the game, or was it during a tournament where you beat them in an earlier round?
It was I think it was in a tournament. I don't recall, frankly.
Well, that's a pretty neat accomplishment to have. Who was your partner? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's a guy that was a former football player named Darryl Riggs.
Okay.
And I just said, let me take every serve.
Almost like the mixed game with the guy and the girl, right? And you get over in the corner.
Yeah, well, those were great days.
Yeah, I can imagine. Manny Sainz is a name that I want to find out more about. I heard he was a heck of a player. For example, he and Bernie used to go up and down the coast and play people for quarters and for apples and all those other sorts of things. He was a shorter guy, but just super talented.
Yeah.
Yeah, what else do you remember about him, personality-wise, game-wise?
I didn't spend a lot of time down at state.
Now, I'm going to mention a handful of names or places from the 50s, from when you were gallivanting around in the Santa Monica area, players and some of the fun places to go to around there. So we discussed Gene a bit. We discussed Bill Olson. Anything you remember about Bernie Holtzman that comes to mind in a sentence or two here, or however long you want to run?
Bernie, I never knew what he did. I mean, he was a bachelor for most of his life. I understand he slept in his car half the time down at State Beach.
Oh, my goodness. Did you ever have any interaction with Mike Bright?
Not a lot. He was a little younger than I.
Okay.
But, he was a fine player. And then, what happened to him? He had a problem, right?
Yeah, I believe he went free diving, and he came up a little bit too quick and got the bends and had some severe health issues. So, yeah, it was a sad story to someone who was a phenomenal athlete and all-around waterman, winning Catalina
Yeah, he swam that goddamn.
Yeah, won that thing all the time. I mean, that's just then he'd come and play in the Manhattan Beach Open and stuff and win. It's like I couldn't even get out of bed that day, let alone do both of them.
You're so right.
Do you remember Davey Bordwell at all? Who the phenomenal track athlete?
He was a really nice young guy, very nice guy. He lived in one of the beach towns, if I'm.
Yeah, and he was a phenomenal track athlete. Do you remember those all-comers events they used to have at the USC Coliseum for?
Yeah.
So when I talked to Bordwell before he passed away, and he told me his like 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old kid, his uncle used to enter Dave into those all-comers events at USC Coliseum and make bets. And no one would think this smaller, thinner kid like that, shorter kid, would be able to run and long jump the way he did. And then he would just annihilate everyone in the 200 in the long jump, and they'd go home with a bunch of money. So about Coach Al Skates, what do you remember about him as a player? And then early on, did you get any beat on him, so to speak, in terms of that, this guy really has got a mind for the game, and do you basically, I'm giving you your opportunity to take full credit for predicting that he was going to have the immense success that he's having in life because of the things the advice you paid him, and he ran with it.
No, he was just a bright guy and a very good player. What he wanted to do, that was a good thing.
Yeah, I think in the fact that he was left off that 64 team, Chuck made it, while it might have been a slight to Coach Skates, who deserved to be there, it made him focus his energies and efforts on coaching, and the world got a Bill Belichick, Vince Lombardi, like once-in-a-generation coach out of it. So sometimes from the ashes rises a phoenix, just like those sons of yours. Anything or anyone else you want to touch on here before we wrap up with a question or two, Art?
I enjoyed playing with the guys, and they were, we had great setters. Walt Schiller and Engen were the setters, and O'Hara, myself, and Bill Olson.
So you were just all about being efficient, not being an all warm-up team member.
No, not. I wasn't trying to hit the ceiling on a bounce.
Sure. Now, looking back on your athletic career from UCLA to the USVBA, competing in the World Championships for volleyball, to that win that you and Riggs had against Manny Signs and Gene Selznick in the early rounds of a tournament, what are you most proud of from your athletic career, and how would you like to be remembered?
There are a lot of good memories, but I don't have one that's, I think, more particular than another. If I was going to be remembered as something, I was a really steady player and a pretty smart player. That's about as well as I could put it.
Wonderful. And then finally, what are you up to these days, or what'd you do for a career so you could make money, so you could avoid doing that gardening and lawn work? Because I think we'd all like that advice, because none of us want to do it. So you could spend more time with your sons and at the beach.
Enjoyed living on the west side. I always wanted to live by the beach, and the Palisades was... At that time, you could buy a house for a reasonable amount of money.
Right.
And going to the beach on weekends with the boys was a lot of fun. I had a wonderful wife. She was a brilliant lady. The only thing she made a mistake was when she figured out she married me. But other than that,
her only bad decision.
she wrote children's books. She was a great mom and a very attractive lady. I was very fortunate. I've had a great life. I mean, I grew up in a nice area, and playing basketball and volleyball, my life kind of a little more interesting than a lot of other people.
Absolutely.
A lot to my deceased, and she was just a marvelous gal. You always, rarely appreciate what you have when you have it.
Mm-hmm.
She was a great mother, and
the wrong voice, but Art went on to have a career in the insurance business, which was very successful.
Mm-hmm.
He also partnered with some guys and started a savings and loan called Bel Air Savings and Loan. It was a real successful enterprise. 3 sons, as you know. Most notable athletic success with Neil, who played for Rudy Sawar at San Diego State. Tom played for Palisades High. I think they had the best high school volleyball team in the country at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's got grandchildren, a lot of whom played different high school sports. And 2 of my kids, Lauren and Gigi, both played college volleyball as well. And then Art's wife, Corey, has children that played volleyball very successfully on the beach and also indoors. And now she's got some grandchildren that may end up doing the same thing as well. They're just
so my understanding is at one point your Art remarried to Corey, and then Corey was any relation to Kevin Martin, who I recall from playing on the beach back
Kevin
in my day in the 90s.
Kevin Kmart, fine volleyball player, very known on the beach, and then her son David also played in college. Played
Nice.
Pepperdine and I think at Cal as well. And so it's been fun for us to get to know those guys who are a little younger than Art's sons and have all of that volleyball connection. And there's, particularly with Neil, there's a real big circuit of overlap with people that we know from volleyball.
Sure. Wonderful. Well, that's some good stuff. Hey, well, Art, I want to tell you, I had heard your name from a handful of people. I had asked Ron Lang a bit about you. I talked to Ron Von Hagen, talked to the Legend Skates, LS as I like to call them, L Skates. It's really neat for me to be able to catch up with you. I really love the history of the sport, and I know that guys like you who are part of it are, like as we like to say, an encyclopedia of things, and when you guys are no longer here, that history goes away with it. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time today with the help of those your 3 rotating whoever's the favorite sons to help fill in some of that history. And I commend you on a successful career, and both anyone that could play basketball at UCLA for Coach Wooden and then become a USVBA 3-time All-American is pretty impressive with me, and then the success that you went on to have in life with the insurance business and the financial stuff, and then raising 3 fine sons. So commend you, and I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. This was a lot of fun, I gotta say. I never liked history until it became involved around volleyball. Go figure.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I had 2 wonderful women in my life. I enjoyed talking to you and appreciate your time.
Yeah, this is great. And I'll see you at the bottom of the incline. Make sure those co-eds are down there tomorrow, 9 a.m.
Right.
We got winners. You follow me here?
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, and then we're going to work our way up and get signs and Selznick. So let's be ready to roll tomorrow.
All right, pal. Nice lovely talking to you.
All right, Art. You have a fine Sunday. You take care, buddy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
This concludes our podcast interview with Art Alper. I have to say this was a pleasure to be able to do with someone like Art that played basketball for John Wooden, also competed on the Hollywood YMCA team back in that early time period in the 50s and gave some great perspective on the history of the sport. Also, a big thanks to Jay and Sally Hanseth for getting me in contact with Neil Alper and Dean Alper so that I could do this interview with Art, and can't put into perspective enough how important it is to capture the history from some of these guys, as every time they move on from us, we lose an entire encyclopedia on the history of the sport. So this was a real pleasure for me. Thanks so much. Also, I want to give credit to our musicians that we use for our podcasts. Opening track
is from the band Sponge, and it's called Rainin', off the album Rotting Pinata. And the closing track is from the band Magna Carta Cartel. The song title is That It's Already Too Late, off the album Good Morning Restrained. Thanks for listening. Catch up soon. Bye-bye.